Welcome to the Oklahoma Firefighters Museum. This is the only fire museum in the whole United States that is owned and operated and financed by volunteer, paid, and retired firefighters. We know of another 17 museums that are either privately owned or either state controlled in some way. So we kind of throw our chests out just a little bit. What I want to do today is take you back in history and tell you about the 4 different periods of time in firefighting in what is commonly known the United States today. We know that around 1615, this is when they started fighting fires, and all they had was wooden buckets. So if you lived in a little town, fort, or community, you had to get as close to water as you possibly could. We find that all of these towns were built by big lakes, streams, or rivers. They also had what was called fire lines. All of the grown men would get in one long line, fill these wooden buckets up at the lake, stream, or river, pass these buckets from one man to the next until he got to the old boy in charge of the fire. His title, he was called the foreman. He would get this bucket, throw this bucket on wherever he thought it'd do the most good. Now after that bucket was empty, all of the smaller boys and girls and all of the grown women, they would be in this other line, passing these empty buckets back so the man could fill them up again. So I think in these earlier days, everybody could be considered a volunteer firefighter in these earlier days. Well, this went all right for quite a number of years. Around the 1730s to the 1760s, they changed their style of bucket. Went to a leather bucket. After the wooden buckets, then came the leather buckets. From about 1730s to the 1760s, these leather buckets was used. Now, if you lived east of the Mississippi River or to a coastal town, you owned a home, you had to have 2 of these leather fire buckets. They had to sit within 9 feet of your fireplace, and they had to be full of water the whole 24 hours of a day. Anytime that foreman knocked on your door, you had to invite him in so he could do one thing, and this was check your buckets. If the water was ever evaporated 2 inches below this brown rim, then you were fined 9 shillings right on the spot. So I think it was the duties of the younger kids to make sure that these buckets were full of water the whole 24 hours of a day. Now we know that in 1736, 6 years later, there was a gentleman by the name of Ben Franklin that actually organized the first volunteer fire department in Philadelphia. He got 5 of his buddies, John Hancock, Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, George Washington, and Raymond Burr to help him. Well, in turn, they got another 30 men of the town to do all the heavy work. And this illuminated case here represents what we call the Ben Franklin collection. Now, we have this on a long-term lease from the Cigna Company, which is up in Philadelphia today. We hope that the people might come by and read some of these white cardboard signs after the tour is over, because some of these pieces are pretty interesting. From the 1760s to the 1790s, they graduated. They went to a pointed bucket, whether it was galvanized steel or tin. Now, the only reason this bucket was pointed, they never wanted you to sit it down when a fire was going on. If they were caught sitting one of these things down before it got to the foreman, so he could put it on the fire itself, then they were taken to the town square and put in the stockade for 24 hours. So the penalties was a little tougher back in these earlier days than they are even today. Now we graduate on to the 1790s. We find that the towns were getting a lot bigger. More people moving into your towns, more homes were being built, and these homes and businesses were getting further and further away from the big lakes, streams, or rivers. So they had to come up with another means of getting this water a little closer to these buildings in case they caught on fire. Right here in front of me, you see the wood water mains that actually were above the ground level. These old boys, they'd go out in the forest, chop down all the straightest trees they could find. They would cut these logs off about 11 to 12 feet long. With the ship augers they had, they were able to drill holes all the way through the logs. You can see right here, this log was pointed off to a fine point, like the other one is down at the other end. What they would do next, they would mop glue around this part right here, wedge this one into this other one, hit this in with the big wooden mallets, When that would be wedged in there, it wouldn't go any further. Then they'd get some tar and put that tar over both of those. So when this glue and tar dried, it would seal these two sections together to where it wouldn't leak water. Now all of these logs from wherever your lake, stream, or river was, they all had to run in a downhill direction. We know that water runs downhill a lot faster than it does uphill. But right through the main part of town on one side of the street, these logs would be laying flat on the ground. About every 100 to 105 or 10 feet, they would drill a hole in the side of this log. Now right below that hole there, they would dig another hole in the ground itself. The hole in the ground was 36 inches in diameter and 36 inches deep. Anytime the old boys needed water, all they'd have to do is pull the plug. There'd be a steady stream of water falling in the hole in the ground. Whatever buckets they were using, they would dip down into this big hole, bring up a full bucket of water. So in the 1790s and things like this, they didn't need as many people to fight fires as they did back in Ben Franklin's day. This piece of wood right here was your original fire plug. This is where your fire plug or your fire hydrant got its name today. Was stuck right there in that hole to keep the water from leaking out. So ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls, we know that for approximately 124 years, they put fires out with some types of buckets. I personally can't tell you whether they put any fires out or not, but they must have had an awful lot of fun trying to. The next 100 years, ladies and gentlemen, came hand-drawn pieces of equipment. This rig right here, it's called a Honeyman. It's a fire engine. It doesn't look like one, but it is. Let me explain to you how this works. This tongue right here would be unloosened from the chain. Two men, one on each side, just guiding this down the middle of the street. You had 6 men on this side of the brake arms. You had 6 men on the other side, and they would be pushing on this thing, going uphill or downhill to wherever the fire was. Now in these days, they would pull this engine up real close to the water, whether it was a river, pond, or creek, like it was in the bucket brigade days. This engine would be pulled up real close to the water. This white tube right here is called a pickup tube. This would be taken clear up off the rack. Now this part right here is called a strainer. That part there would be down under the water, wherever your lake, stream, or river was. They would screw this end part here onto the intake here in the back. Along come 6 men pulling this hand-drawn hose cart right behind this engine to the fire. But they would wrap 750 feet of hose around this reel. They would attach their hose onto the outlet, stretch the hose on out to wherever the fire was, and add their fire nozzle. All right, you've got your hose all stretched out. You've got your pickup tube down under the water. You're ready to start pumping water in this thing. Well, this Honeyman is called an in-stroke pump. It's a Class B pumper. These brake arms here would be unloosened, turned around here, and locked underneath that C-clamp. This other arm would come out, this other arm over there would come out, and the other arm would come out. Now, it only took 40 men to pump this rig at one time. You had 10 men on this side, 10 men on this side, 10 on the other, and 10 on the other. They say if these 40 men were stroking these arms at 40 to 50 strokes a minute, you had all of the 750 feet of hose stretched out, the nozzle pointing at a 45-degree angle. You could shoot a stream of water approximately 123 feet away. If the nozzle was pointing straight up in the air, pretty close to 80 feet. So ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls, I'm thinking by this day and time, they're actually starting to put fires out. The copper tub right here, as you see, there is a brass cylinder with an iron rod that's going down in the middle of it. There's one on the other side. So anytime an arm went down, a gallon of water would go out the end of the hose. Anytime this arm came up, sucked in a gallon of water from your pickup tube that's down out of the lake, stream, or river. But the life of a firefighter, ladies and gentlemen, was only 4 to 5 minutes, because They were wore completely out if they were stroking these arms at 40 to 50 strokes a minute. And the history books I read, I always wanted to know why 400 to 500 men would show up to pump one fire in a little town. I could never understand this. I do now. But for 100 years, ladies and gentlemen, this is the way it was done. The Honeyman Brothers was a manufacturer of fire engines out of Boston, Massachusetts. We know the first Honeyman that was built in 1792, was sold to Bath, Maine. For approximately 100 years, the Honeyman family reigned. And in this 100 years, they made 745 Honeymans. On April the 21st of 1870, this rig right here was sold to the New Richmond, Indiana Fire Department. And it's listed in the book as number 708. So this is an original. Out of that 745 Honeymans built in 100 years, 228 of them today have been burned up in a fire, been dismantled, been buried at the bottom of the ocean, or they don't know where they're at. We here in Oklahoma, ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls, we don't know too much about this hand-drawn pieces of equipment. You had to get east of the Mississippi River. So we're very fortunate of having this. So for 100 years, kids, this is the way it was done. For the next 100 years, ladies and gentlemen, they fought fires with steam engines. From 1828 to 1928, the steam engines was used. Now, the steam engines didn't come to the United States till around 1840. A man by the name of Bathwhite brought it over from England. They entered it in the World's Fair up in Cincinnati, Ohio. This was the first glimpse that the American people had of a steam engine. They fell in love with it. They even persuaded those old boys to start building them over there. They did, but they made one mistake. They didn't ask the volunteer firefighters if it was all right. See, the volunteer firefighters, ladies and gentlemen, never wanted to see the steam get started, because if they knew that the steam ever got started, that they would be out of a job. It only took 3 men to pump a steam engine, took the place of 108 men on a hand-drawn engine. So these volunteers fought these old boys from the morning they got up until they went to bed at night. Well, they scared them so much, they just hooked up and went back to England. But they made a mistake. When they came over in the first place, they brought this little German immigrant with them, and his last name was Ahrens. They taught this Ahrens fella all they knew about steam. By the time 1850 rolled along, this is when the United States federal government started issuing patents. Well, this Ahrens fella had gone in with the L.A. Latta, and by the time 1850 rolled along, they had a steam engine already built. They got it. And in 1852, the first steam engine that was sold to the Cincinnati Fire Department. Now, these early steam engines were actually pulled by the men down the middle of the street. They didn't weigh too much in weight. We know in 1859, when they started using the cast iron and the steel, then this is when they had to start putting horses to them. Now, this rig here is an 1873 Ammons keg. It weighed 4,800 pounds. It only took 2 horses to pull this one. Around the 1880s and 1890s, when these steam engines got to weigh as much as 8, 9, maybe 10,000 pounds, this is when the 3 and the 4 horse teams had to come in. So many of the kids today has never seen how these horses were actually hooked up at a firehouse. So what we've done, we gave the Knops taxidermist people up in Spokane, Washington, a contract to stuff us 2 horses life size. Now, the reason, boys and girls, I have stuffed horses in here, I can't have live horses, so I have to have the next best thing. When these horses were on call, boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, they were on call for 24 hours a day. And they stood right back by these wheels on both sides. Well, they had to have something soft to stand on, because if they didn't, the bottom of their hoofs would get sore. If you'll notice, you see some wood bricks that's lined up all around here. Well, boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, these are the original wood bricks that the horses stood on prior to 1900 right here in Oklahoma City. They found out that these wood bricks could do the trick. Now, hanging from ropes from the ceiling right over where the horses are right now was the big T's that held all the leather work and all of the collars and everything. Now, these collars right here, they were open up at the bottom. Some of these horses, pretty smart. When the bells would ring, the alarms would come in, They could come out of these stalls, come right here by this tongue, put their heads through those collars, throw that collar up in the air, it would come off that T and would fasten shut under its neck. All the firefighter would have to do is pull the chain out of that T, it would flip the hooks over, the leather work would come down right over the horse's back. On this double tree right back here, there was only 3 slap hooks on each side that they'd have to hook up, and they said if a team of horses could do this, they could get out of the house almost as fast as their modern pieces of equipment can today. So, boys and girls, from 1828 to 1928, steam engines was used, and some of our records show that some of the towns in the United States were still using their steam engines up to the early 30s. The chief's buggy, of course, is this white buggy that's sitting right over here. This is how the fire chief and his driver would get to a fire. One horse would pull him. The last phase of firefighting, gasoline or diesel engines. We know that the first piece of equipment that was used for fighting fire of any kind in the United States was a 1904 Marionette. It was a salvage and overhaul truck. It was owned by an insurance company, again up in Cincinnati, Ohio. We haven't fought fires 100 years yet with gasoline or diesels. We've got another 8 years to go before it's 100 years. Now this rig right here, of course, is a 1919 Seagraves. This was Guthrie, Oklahoma's first pumping unit. We've had the thing restored and we brought it in, and anything that has a gasoline motor in it that's inside our museum here has come through our overhead doors at the back under their own power. So all of these rigs will actually run. Now we have spent just a little money on this rig, a little less than $6,000 to restore this rig as you look at it today. Now I'm going to boast a little bit, but I could probably take this rig to any muster they got in the United States, put it in their parade, after the parade, draft or pump out of it. I'll come home with a blue ribbon every time. So we're very proud of our museum here and with the equipment. And also there's a gentleman, an Oklahoma City retired firefighter. His name is Al Preston. Al restores our rigs for us. And but what's so nice about Al, Al doesn't charge us anything for his labor. So if you get an old boy like that, you better keep him. And so we thank Al very much for the hard work he has done over the past 6 to 7 years. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what is called the Last Alarm. We think that this is the largest mural in the United States that's dedicated to fire pieces of equipment. A gentleman walked into our museum one day, said he was an artist. He always wanted to paint a mural, but he had never had the opportunity of doing so. He showed us some artwork. We fell in love with it. We went to the board, got the board's approval. Mr. Campbell lived right here at the museum while he was painting his mural. It took Mr. Campbell 13 months and 10 days from when he started this to when he finished it. The mural stands 8 foot high, 58 feet 8 inches long. There's 38 pieces of equipment that's painted on it, and today the mural is valued at a close to $175,000. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the old number 9 firehouse. We know in 1848 there was a gentleman that lived in Southern California. His name was John Gainwell. He's the gentleman that invented the Gainwell system. He went around to all the towns trying to sell his system to the different cities, but in these earlier days nobody would buy it. 4 years later, in 1852, he ended up in Boston, Massachusetts. Boston City form of government liked the idea, but they didn't want to spend the money to see if it worked. They told the young man, all right, we'll gamble with you. You set up a 16-block area, put your alarm boxes on every corner. At our number 1 firehouse, set up your alarm system, and when our dignitaries come and pull the hook, if it works, then we will buy it. If it doesn't, you can head on back to Southern California where you started. 4.5 months later, the system was set up, and when the dignitaries came and pulled the hook and pulled down on this lever, the doggone thing worked. So we know that Boston, Massachusetts was the first town in the United States to have the Gamewell system. Now, to show you how this actually works, inside the fire alarm box, each box had a separate code number. Say, for instance, in the town that you lived in, this alarm box was on a certain corner in your town. Its code number, 232. Maybe one block down the road, another box number might be 233 or 234. No two numbers were alike. On the little silver gear right here, there is notches. 2 notches, 3 notches, and 2 notches. This little brass arm there, when the hook was pulled down, would go around in a circle. It would tap out your alarm box. It would go through your lines, go through your glass case sitting on the brown pedestal, take it over to the white piece of ticker tape that's stretched across the 2 reels on the big panel board in the back, and tap out your 232 4 times. This would enable the man that was on watch to get up, count the holes in the paper, open his master logbook, which is sitting here in the chair, turning to the page where box 232 was on. Now, in your first column there, you have your box number, the location of your box. In your second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth columns shows what companies would respond to a first alarm, a second, a third, fourth, and fifth. Now here in Oklahoma City, like almost any place else, if your house ever caught on fire, there would be 5 pieces of equipment that would make your home. 2 engine companies, a ladder truck company, a squad, and a chief. Now if it's a school, church, shopping center, picture show, someplace where a lot of people congregate, then we would send an extra engine company and an extra truck company. So this would be 7 pieces. But the alarms, the bells that would ring, this is when the horses were here. And these were the bells that the horses heard so they could come out of their stalls without any help from anybody. So when this arm was pulled straight down, so ladies and gentlemen, when you go through a little town on vacation or something like this, if you see an alarm box on a street corner, you will see one that has probably had very, very little changes made in it since 1900. We do thank you for coming by and visiting with us. Our museum is open 7 days a week from 10 o'clock in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. We're located at 2716 Northeast 50th in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Thank you very much and good afternoon. The Oklahoma Rescue Memorial. The firefighters in Oklahoma wanted to do something after the aftermath of the April 19th, 1995 bombing of the Mural Building. We have got 2 of these made. It's this one that you're looking at, plus the other one is in Washington, D.C. at the International Firefighters Association headquarters. The Midwest Trophy people had come up with an idea, and we went through with it. A piece of the stone here of the building, and then, of course, Mr. Fields with the child. So we're very proud of this. This will be in our museum as long as our museum is open. In memory of the helpless individuals killed in honor of the ones who risked their lives to save others, and with absolute appreciation to those who worked until the last was found, and to those who remained by the home front ready to serve at a moment's notice. We will remember, rebuild, and continue to make this America's heartland.